Today we are identifying the inherent fatal flaws of our existing socioeconomic operating system. The entire architecture of ownership, accumulation, and the hoarding of finite resources.
Right. And we are looking at this through a really specific, honestly pretty intense lens today. Israel's external intelligence agency, the Mossad.
The geopolitical theater surrounding that agency is irrelevant data noise. We are examining this entity strictly as the ultimate, hyper-efficient resource management device. It operates in a landscape where the physical cost of survival is astronomically high. I will be auditing this from the perspective of circular capitalism, demonstrating why the current paradigm of ownership has reached its toxic, logical terminus.
Well, and I will be defending the existing operating system, because what you are calling a systemic disease is, it's actually a highly refined survival mechanism. You cannot just completely ignore human nature and historical trauma when analyzing how systems develop.
Trauma does not alter mathematics. The existing system converts information asymmetry directly into physical interference in order to monopolize the ultimate finite resource, which is safety. When an entity prioritizes physical survival through resource hoarding over any structural framework, it proves that accumulation inevitably warps global resource allocation into a zero-sum weapon. The logic of circular capitalism, where the structural mechanism of hoarding is eradicated entirely, is the only mathematically correct answer to human survival.
But you are categorizing a highly practical adaptation as a mathematical error. Look at the historical data. For thousands of years, historically marginalized people, they couldn't just hoard land or physical infrastructure.
Because physical assets in an accumulation-based system are subject to confiscation, the flaw of the system is obvious.
Right, but they adapted to that. They accumulated the only resources that hostile states couldn't easily seize: intangible data, closed human networks. It was like this ancient secret spice, a cultural binding agent passed down through generations just to maintain cohesion without a physical state.
Intangible hoarding remains structurally identical to physical hoarding. It relies on exclusion.
No, it relies on survival. And when confronted with the modern necessity of state defense, they didn't fail. They just repurposed the network. They took that exact same ancient secret spice and structurally optimized it at the raw material for tear gas. They used their high-density internal trust to blind and disorient external threats. It is a necessary adaptation, not an economic failure.
Weaponizing a closed network to artificially blind competing actors is the definition of a collapsing system. It requires infinite thermodynamic energy to maintain a perimeter of preemptive defense. Circular capitalism relies on open-loop distribution. By removing the structural incentive to hoard finite security, it eliminates the requirement to proactively destroy the environment around you.
You're talking about open-loop distribution, but your structural framework completely ignores the lived reality of closed network trust. You view the concept of being, chosen or operating inside an exclusive network as this arrogant monopolization. It isn't.
It is the systemic centralization of survival data to exclude non-participants.
It is an inescapable, high-difficulty survival mission. Look, imagine a student who has been targeted for death by their entire class, okay? That student cannot rely on the school's official rules.
Because the school's architecture is based on the same flawed operating system of accumulation.
Regardless of the school's architecture, the environment is actively lethal to them. To survive, they have to painstakingly memorize every single hidden passage in the building. They have to secretly control the inventory of the school's shop. They rely on ultra-high-density trust, strictly limited to insiders, because they fundamentally lack the margin, the leeway to trust the outside world.
That model is mathematically futile.
It is keeping them alive. When your physical existence is continuously threatened, you do not have the luxury of open-source resource sharing.
You are describing an ultra-Spartan, members-only club built on impossibly strict boundary conditions. Let us analyze the scalability of this student's survival mechanism. If you mandate this specific operating system of closed-loop trust globally, the required internal compliance is so restrictive that cheeseburgers would literally vanish from McDonald's worldwide. The system demands total dietary, cultural, and informational isolation.
It demands discipline to prevent eradication.
It prevents systemic stability. Furthermore, assume you completely bypass these entry barriers. Assume you miraculously induct all 8 billion human beings into this highly exclusive club. You give every single person on Earth the exact same last name and bind them within this ultra-high-density trust. The fundamental mechanism of scarcity remains entirely unresolved.
Wait, if everyone is in the network, the external threat is gone.
The physical, musical chairs over arable land, fresh water, and energy continues unabated, because the underlying logic is still ownership. You have not achieved circular stability, you have merely localized the conflict. You elevate geopolitical warfare into a highly sophisticated, internal psychological fight over the living room air conditioning remote control. Ownership-based systems cannot solve scarcity.
But you're treating this behavior as this blind, unfeeling algorithm of accumulation. You're completely dismissing the moral architecture governing it. There is a survival manual here, a strict set of commandments at the core of this operating system.
A manual designed to optimize the hoarding of resources for the in-group?
The absolute baseline rule is thou shalt not steal. It explicitly forbids indiscriminate hoarding. But the system is pragmatic. It has a built-in emergency stop button, pikuach nefesh, the principle that when facing absolute extinction, the preservation of physical life supersedes all other operational rules.
An emergency stop button that permits unilateral resource acquisition merely institutionalizes theft under the guise of trauma.
It is not theft, it is survival. Let me explain the mechanism. Imagine a highly disciplined person strictly adhering to a low-carb diet. Under normal conditions, they follow the rules perfectly, no deviation. But if you drop that polite person onto the side of a freezing mountain where they are actively starving to death, they will silently reach into their sleeping neighbor's pocket and steal their chocolate bar.
That localized physical energy acquisition highlights the fundamental fragility of the operating system.
It highlights reality. That isn't malice. It isn't a systemic failure of the dietary rules. It is a vital action triggered solely by the imminent threat of biological eradication. Trauma dictates the absolute necessity of this emergency override.
The moment an operating system programs an emergency stop button that allows for the suspension of rules based on a perceived existential threat, the entire framework devolves into a paranoid preemptive physical security system.
It becomes a necessary defense mechanism.
It becomes catastrophic inefficiency. You no longer simply lock your doors against known, active thieves. Your trauma-driven algorithm demands that you dig silent, lethal pitfalls in the front yards of anyone your system categorizes as a potential thief.
Because waiting for them to become an active thief means you die.
You are forced to adopt the posture of a friendly neighbor while secretly rewriting that opponent's alarm clocks so that they detonate 3 days later. A structural paradigm built on the accumulation of security always weaponizes information to physically immobilize others. It transforms safety into a zero-sum commodity.
And that active immobilization is the absolute pinnacle of national security. It is the most rational, cost-saving measure available to a population that is under siege.
It is the proactive dismantling of global stability.
You are looking at this purely from a perspective of theoretical economic efficiency, but you have to factor in the literal cost of kinetic warfare. Waiting for a physical attack to occur, absorbing the kinetic damage to your cities, and then retaliating, that requires a massive, unsustainable expenditure of blood and infrastructure.
Paralyzing potential threats preemptively ensures the environment remains perpetually hostile.
Paralyzing threats before they can act is the ultimate efficiency. Utilizing that weaponized information you despise is the only way to proactively dismantle a threat matrix. You cannot fault a system for realizing the preemptive defense guarantees the survival of families, of children. This isn't paranoia. It is the agonizing, heavy burden of survival in a world that wants you destroyed.
What you falsely categorize as a rational cost-saving measure is the ultimate, undeniable proof of the existing system's terminal failure. The operating system of accumulation has birthed an uncancelable, rogue security company that has fundamentally monopolized the world's geopolitical Wi-Fi passwords.
It secures the network against actors trying to dismantle it.
It is an architecture of control that turns a user's device to smoke the exact second they attempt to play a video that threatens the network. Let us examine the mechanics of your preemptive paralyzation. When your definition of security requires remotely paralyzing a burglar's fingers at the precise millisecond they purchase lock-picking tools at the hardware store, information has ceased to be a medium of exchange.
It becomes a necessary physical barrier.
It mutates into a blunt, physical weapon used to permanently freeze the world in a state of suspended terror. This is not a functioning society. It is a global prison constructed entirely by the bankrupt concept of accumulation. You are defending a system that relies on total global surveillance and instant physical destruction at the point of intent.
Look, you can call it a global prison from the safety of your pristine theoretical models, but you are deliberately ignoring the visceral physical reality of human fear.
Human fear is a byproduct of finite resource hoarding.
When historical data dictates that the world will not protect you, the absolute necessity of protecting one's own family supersedes any utopian economic theory of circular sharing. You can't just mandate an open source distribution of resources when the actors involved are absolutely terrified of physical eradication. The existing world order, for all of its flaws, the heavy arbor of ownership, it is literally the only shield we have against.
The existing operating system of ownership and accumulation is mathematically bankrupt and is currently collapsing under the infinite, unsustainable cost of its own paranoid defenses. The complete transition to the logic of circular capitalism, where the fundamental concept of hoarding finite resources is entirely eradicated from the human equation, is not a moral preference. It is the absolute sole rational investment for human survival.